Good morning and welcome to Godly Play. Last week we started the story of Moses. Moses is a very important person in the Old Testament. Now Moses grew up in the household of the Pharaoh. He was raised by the Pharaoh's daughter. But Moses was actually an Israelite. The Israelites were the people of God who were supposed to be living in the Promised Land, but somehow found themselves living in Egypt and working as slaves for the Pharaoh. Now, God told Moses that he was the one who should lead the Israelites out of Egypt and back to the Promised Land. And when we left the story last week, Moses and his brother Aaron were on their way back to Egypt to meet the Pharaoh and talk to the Pharaoh about letting the Israelites leave Egypt. So Moses and Aaron went to the Pharaoh and they told him that God wanted the Pharaoh to let the Israelites leave Egypt. And Pharaoh said, no, they're my workers. That's how I build all these big buildings and keep the economy running in Egypt. I can't let them go. So Moses and Aaron went away from the Pharaoh and went back and said, well, how are we going to convince the Pharaoh to let the Israelites go? And they went back several more times to ask the Pharaoh to let the Israelites leave Egypt. And every time he said no. So then God figured, well, he had to help Moses and Aaron convince the Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. And he sent several what we call plagues to Egypt to convince Pharaoh that he should let the Israelites go. The plagues were things like frogs. He sent frogs all over Egypt. There were frogs everywhere. And Moses and Aaron would tell Pharaoh, God sent all these frogs as a sign that he wants the Israelite people to be let go out of Egypt. And at first Pharaoh would say, okay, stop the frogs and I'll let the people go. And then the frogs would stop and Pharaoh would change his mind and say, no, I'm not going to let them go. So there were frogs and there were flies and there were locusts and there was the water was bad. God turned the water bad so that the people couldn't drink it anymore. And every time the Pharaoh would say, okay, I'll let them go, and then the plague would stop, and the Pharaoh would change his mind and say no. So finally, God said to Moses and Aaron, you're just going to need to gather the people together, and you're going to have to take them out of Egypt. And I will be with you. I will help you. So they gathered all the people, all the Israelite people, and there were a lot of them by that time. I'll put a few of them up here. And they got ready, and they started to leave Egypt. So Moses and Aaron gathered all the people, all the Israelites, and they got ready to leave Egypt. And the route they took them to the Red Sea. They got to the Red Sea, this big body of water, and they said, how are we ever going to get across the Red Sea, especially with this many people? How are we going to get across? And then to make matters worse, they looked behind them and they could see Pharaoh and his army coming up behind them, trying to stop them from leaving. And God told Moses and Aaron, I'm with you. I'll help you make this happen, and we'll get the people out of Egypt. So, what happened was, they got to the Red Sea, and miraculously, the waters of the Red Sea dried up enough where Moses and Aaron and all the people could walk across. Because you know, under the Red Sea, under the water, there's dry land. So they walked across, and just as Pharaoh and his armies of people approached the Red Sea, the water filled back in again, and Pharaoh and the armies couldn't get across. So the people were safe. They were out of Egypt. The Pharaoh and his armies couldn't reach them. And they were headed to the Promised Land. So next week, we're going to find out a little bit more about what happened to the Israelites as they went along on their journey back to the Promised Land. Hope you join us then. Bye.